Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We're continuing to learn the halachas of Talmud Minim, and we'll be learning in today's video Daf Kuftes Vav Amid Beis together with a good part of Kuftes Zayin Amid Aleph. We begin on Kuftes Vav Amid Beis with the brand new Siman Tafresh Mem Ches Dvarim Hapsulim Be'Esrog, the things that render an Esrog Pasul L'Boichav Beis Seifim, and here we have 22 Seifim. So we're beginning to learn the halachas of Esrog. Says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph, Esrog hayavesh pasul, an Esrog that is dried out is pasul. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Aleph, hayavesh, v'hu yavesh rak b'miktsasai, if only part of the Esrog is dried out, Ayin l'kaman b'Sif Yud Beis. We'll cover that in Sif Yud Beis of the Mishnah Berurah Sham, and in Mishnah Berurah is cut in Mem Ches over there. Ice cut and base, pasul, the Esrog is pasul. Why is it dried out Esrog pasul? Says the Chavetz Chaim, the Einai Hadar. This is brought down from the Gemara, Limud Aleph. A dried out Esrog is not Hadar, and the requirement of Hadar is written actually by the Esrog, pre-Eitz Hadar. Because all of the Daled Minim are mentioned in the same pasuk, we give the requirement of Hadar to all of the Daled Minim, but it is mentioned specifically by the Esrog. Continues the Chavetz Chaim, Ve'imhu kamush, if the Esrog is withered, she'ener lach v'lo yavesh, it's not really moist anymore, but it's not dried out. Afilu kamush bekulai, even if the entire Esrog is kamush in this way, kosher, the Esrog is kosher, ta'adayin yesh by miktsas lecha, because it still has some moisture to it. Umikamakim, nevertheless, kevich anu royin shu kamush, once we see that the Esrog is kamush, Das HaMagen Avram, it's the opinion of the Magen Avram, Tzarich lebodkai, that you need to inspect this Esrog to see whether or not this Esrog is Yavesh, K'moshe Kasav b'Shulchan Aruch, as the Shulchan Aruch is going to write now how it is that we could be beidik an Esrog to see if an Esrog is Yavesh or not. Continues the Mechaber says, V'shir hayaveshus, the measurement to see if an Esrog is Yavesh. When is it? What is the shear? What is the point at which an Esrog is considered to be Yavesh? Says the Mechaber, Kishe'ena moitzi shum lecha, when it no longer gives forth any moisture. And the Mechaber says, V'yivdaik, and you could check the Esrog to see if it's considered moist or not, al yedei sheyava by machat, by passing a needle through the Esrog, u'boy chut, and the needle has a thread attached to it. Ve'em yesh by lecha, if there still is moisture within the Esrog, yeroeh bachut, that moisture will now be discernible on the thread. Now, what exactly does this mean? What exactly are you going to do? Explains the Mishnah Berurah an ice cut and gimel. Yeroeh bachut. Hikshu out there. What the Mechaber is describing is you're going to take a sewing needle, you're going to attach a thread to this needle, you're going to push the needle through the Esrog and draw, it seems at first glance, this is what the Mechaber is saying, you're going to draw the needle out from the other side and pull the thread through the inside of the Esrog. Now you check the thread. Is there any moisture on the thread? If there's moisture on the thread, so that means within the Esrog there still is moisture. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and gimel. Hikshu achrayim, the achrayim ask, the imkain, if you're going to do this, ye a nekev mafulosh. Now there is going to be a hole that passes directly through the Esrog, because you're putting in a needle on one end, you're pushing it all the way through, drawing it out on the other end, so you're going to have a tunnel, you're going to have a hole that passes through the entirety of the Esrog. Upasal l'dei rishona shebesif beis. Now we're going to discuss the question of a hole that goes through an Esrog in Sif Beis. And according to the Dei Rishona, according to the first opinion in Sif Beis, in the Mechaber, we're going to see that when there's a hole that passes all the way through the Esrog, even if the Esrog is not chosar, even if there's nothing missing from the Esrog, so it's not that you dug out anything from the Esrog, the needle just compacted the sides of the hole, but it passed all the way through, so that it's a nekev mafulish. According to the first day, according to the first opinion in Sif Beis, that would passel the Esrog. So how exactly are you going to make this test to see if there's any moisture in the esrog, if according to the Day Rishona in Siv Beis, this hole would passel the esrog. So Hikshu Achroinim, the Achroinim asked this kasha. Dim Kain, if you do this, Yeh Nekev Mefulish, there's going to be a Nekev Mefulish, there's going to be a hole going straight through the esrog, Upasel Day Rishona Shebesif Beis. And now the esrog is going to be puzzle according to the first opinion in Sif Beis, Afilu B'loy Chesaron, even if there's actually nothing missing from the esrog. V'tiritz HaMagen Avram, the Magen Avram answers that there is a way you could do this test without puzzle in the esrog. How is that? Shetoichev hamachat ktsas b'mokam oivi shala. What you're going to do is you're going to take the sewing needle. Now, a sewing needle has an eye on one end, and the thread goes in the eye. The way we understood the mechaber at first was that you take the pointy end of the needle, that's the end opposite the eye, you puncture the esrog, and you push the entire needle through the esrog, pull the needle out the other side, and the needle is pulling the thread from the back end of the machat. It pulls it all the way through the esrog, and now you have a nekev mefulish. Now you have a hole going through and through the esrog. Says the Magen Avram, no, that's not what it means. Shetoichev hamachat ktsas b'mokom oivi shela. You're actually going to push the needle into the esrog on the wide side of the needle. That's the side with the eye. Dahainu b'mokom chor hanekev. You're not putting the pointy side of the needle into the esrog. You're putting the back end of the needle, the end that has the eye with the thread. You're going to push that into the needle and then pull it back out. By pushing the back end, the eye end of the needle that has the thread into the esrog, you're pushing the thread part way into the esrog and now pull it back out. So the needle never goes all the way through the esrog, and you're not going to have a nekev mefulish. When you pull the needle back out, you look at the thread that went in, and you'll see if it's moist or not. And now ve'ein ka nekev mefulish. Now you don't have a nekev mefulish because you never pushed the needle all the way through the esrog. That's the explanation of the Magen Avram. This is how the Magen Avram explains the Mechaber's test in a way where you don't end up with a nekev mefulish. V'yesh tertzu, the Mishnah Berurah brings down. There are others. He brings this down for the Bekurah Yaakov, and the Bekurah Yaakov understood the Taz this way. V'yesh tertzu, there are those who give a different explanation of how this might work. The mefulish loy nikra. How do we understand a nekev mefulish? When we asked the kasha on the mechaber, we were understanding that any time there's a hole that goes all the way through the esrog, that's a nekev mefulish. There are those that want to explain the mechaber like this: the yesher tertzu, the mefulish loy nikra. We don't consider a hole to be mefulish, elo kishenikev beroichav haesrog me'ever le'ever, only if the hole goes through the width of the esrog from one side to the other. Afilu shaloi kineged chadrei hazera, even if the needle passes through the width of the esrog, but it never penetrates the part of the esrog that has the seeds inside it. For those of you who have never cut open an esrog, we have an esrog is shaped something like this, right? It's narrow at the top, it's wide at the center, and it's narrow at the bottom. Now, if you cut open an esrog and you look at the cross section of an esrog, it's similar to another citrus fruit. It's similar to what the cross section of a lemon looks like, but there's a major difference. A lemon has a thin outer peel. It has a thin inner white rind right beneath the peel, and then the bulk of the inside of the lemon is the flesh of the fruit with the seed cavities. That's what the Mishnah Berurah calls here the chadrei hazera, those little sacs of flesh that the pits, the seeds of the lemon are in. If you cut open an esrog, what you'll see is a little bit different. There's that thin yellow outer peel, then there's a very thick white rind, and the seed cavity only takes up the seed chambers and the flesh only take up a little bit of room in the very center of the esrog. Now, were you to take an esrog, see if I could do this with my hands. Okay, I'm making the general shape of the esrog with my hands here. You see where the ruler goes across? If, let's say the ruler is the needle, if you pass the needle directly from side to side through the center of the, when I say center, I mean the height. If you would do it like really towards the middle of the esrog, then the needle is going to penetrate the flesh and it's going to go through the chadrei hazera. It's going to go through the area at the center of the esrog where you have the seeds. But let's say you pass the needle all through the esrog all the way down near the bottom. Now, you may very well be below the part of the esrog at the center where the chadrei hazera are. You might miss the inside flesh of the fruit totally. The needle might go through the outside yellow peel, pass through a section of the white rind, and then go out the other side through the yellow peel, but it may never penetrate the chadrei hazera at the center because it may miss it. That's only all the way at the center. If you go above it or you go below it, you'll miss it. So what the Berurah Yaakov is saying over here in the name of the Taz, the way he's explaining the Taz, is he's saying you have to understand what a nekev mefulish means. So again, let's read it inside. We'll start from right where the ice cut and hay for the Sharet Zion is. V'yesh terzu. There are those that answer this kasha. How could the Mechaber suggest doing this test if it's going to cause a nekev mefulish? So the Berurah Yaakov, based on the Taz, wants to say the mefulish loy nikra. We don't consider a hole to be a nekev mefulish. Ela kishenikev baroicha v'esrig me'ever le'ever. Only if the needle passes through the entire width of the esrog from one side to the other side, afilu shaloi keneged chadrei hazera, and it would be considered a nekev mefulish even in the case that we just described, where it misses the chadrei hazera. It goes below the chadrei hazera or above the chadrei hazera. But as long as it goes through the entire width of the esrog from one side to the other, that would be called a nekev mefulish, and that would passel the esrog according to the day of Rishayna in Siv Beis. However, kishenikev ba'ovi shaloi, if if the esrog gets a hole through its thickness, shaloi mitzad acher, but it never goes out the other side. What does this mean? Let's say the needle does not go through the width of the esrog, like this, where it went through the width. Let's say instead the needle passes through the length of the esrog, from top to bottom, but not at the center. See, the way I'm doing it here, I have the ruler is the needle is going through the center, from the top to the bottom. Let's say instead it goes along one side. Trying to align this with the camera properly so you can see it. See where the ruler is now? Now the needle is going from the top to the bottom, so it's penetrating through the length of the esrog, but it's off to one side. It's not going through the center. If the needle passes through the thickness of the esrog, mitzad acher, on one side, dahainu, what does that mean? La'orecha esrog, it travels through the length, the height of the esrog. Me uktzai, from the bottom where the ukitz is, klape chotmai, going upwards through the top. The chotim is the top of the esrog. Ve'enoi magia lechadrei hazera, and it stays on one side of the esrog. So it never goes through the chadrei hazera. In that case, many would agree it's possible to say that is not called mefulish. So again, what the Mechaber told us was like this. The Mechaber said a dried out esrog is puzzle. The Mechaber said, how do we tell if an esrog is dried out? So he said, if the esrog is kamush, if the esrog is starting to look dry, but we want to measure the esrog to see is there any lechus, is there any moisture left in the esrog, the Mechaber said what we need to do is, we need to pass a needle with a thread. The way the Mechaber was written, the way we understood it was, we're going to take a needle with a thread, pass the needle through the esrog, draw the thread through the esrog, and then look at the thread and see if there's moisture on the thread. Frek the achronim, that would create a situation where the esrog has a nekev mefulish. The esrog now has a hole that goes clean through the esrog, and according to the Dirshu Rishona, we're going to see shortly in Sif Beis, that would render the esrog puzzle. So how could the Mechaber suggest such a test? Answered the Magen Avram. We have two different answers here. We have the Magen Avram's answer, and we have the Berurah Yaakov's answer based on the Taz. Answers the Magen Avram, no, you're misunderstanding the Mechaber. You're thinking that we take a needle, we put a thread through the eye of the needle, we take the pointy end of the needle, we push it into the esrog, pull it out to the other side, and we draw the thread through the esrog. You're right, says the Magen Avram. That, if you did that, it would possibly esrog. There would be a nekev mefulish. Says the Magen Avram, that's not what the Mechaber meant. What the Mechaber meant was turn the needle around. Take the side of the needle that has the eye, push it into the esrog a little bit, so that a little bit of the thread goes into the esrog, then pull it out and look at the part of the thread that went into the esrog, see is it moist or not. That's the Magen Avram's explanation of the Mechaber's test, and now he answers the kasha of the nekev mefulish. Says the Berurah Yaakov based on the Taz, a little bit different. He says you're misunderstanding the psul of a nekev mefulish. The psul of the nekev mefulish is, if you have a hole that goes all the way through the width of the esrog, that is going to create a psul of nekev mefulish, and that's going to be puzzle even if the needle that goes through the esrog never penetrates the chadrei azera, even if it never penetrates the flesh at the center of the esrog where the seeds are, even if it misses it because it goes above it or it goes below it, but as long as it passes through the width of the esrog, that indeed would render the esrog puzzle. However, let's say we do this not by going across the esrog through its width. No, we're going to go up from the bottom and we're going to come out the top. We're going to go through the length of the esrog. Then, says the Berurah Yaakov, if you miss the chadrei azera, if instead of going through the center of the esrog and going up through the chadrei azera, if instead you stay to the side of the esrog and you go in at the bottom, you penetrate at the bottom and you go up through the top, so you only go through the outer yellow peel and the white rind, but you miss the flesh of the esrog, that would not be considered a nekev mefulish, and that would not puzzle the esrog. So what the Mechaber is saying, according to the Berurah Yaakov, is do just that. Take the needle with the thread, penetrate at the bottom towards the side, push it up through the top, pull it out, check the thread, and see if there's moisture on the thread. Okay, very, very interesting. Okay. Now we could continue over here with the Mechaber. So the Mechaber said over here, Esrog hayavesh pasol v'shir hayaveshus k'sheda ma'isi shom leicha v'yivdok al dei sheyavar by machat u'baychut v'im yesh by leicha yeira'eh ba'chut. Now says the Rama, the Esrog shehu mishana she'avra. If you have an Esrog that's from last year, you're trying to keep an Esrog from year to year. I know that the Rishiva Zatzal, Rav Moshe Zechet Tzaddik v'Kadosh Levracha, excuse me, Rav Moshe said that back in Russia, I think there were 3 towns or 5 towns that would use the same lulav for 3 years. They couldn't get a lulav. A lulav was, even if you got your hands on a lulav, the pricing was outrageous because the Soviets made it impossible to get because it was a religious article. It would be hundreds of rubles for an esrog, for a lulav. So hundreds of rubles for a lulav. So they had one lulav, and that one lulav was shared by multiple towns. And they used it, I don't remember if he said for 3 years or for 5 years. They figured out how to keep it so that it shouldn't become yavesh. So let's say you had such a situation with an esrog, and you want to save an esrog from year to year. Says the Rama, Ve'esrog shehu mishana she'avra, an esrog that comes from the previous year, vada yaveshu, it's certainly going to be yavesh, upasul, and it would be pasul. Says the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Dalet, Vada Yaveshu, it certainly would be Yavesh. Ritzainai Loimar. The Mishnah Berurah says what the Ramah wants to say over here is, if you have an esrog from last year, it is not possible that you're going to find moisture in it. And there is no purpose in doing a bedika. It cannot be that there's going to have any leichus to it, and therefore, as katan hey upasul, therefore an esrog from the previous year is pasul. But says the Mishnah Berurah, ayin b'sharat tzion, take a look at the sharat tzion, masha hivenu b'shem timim deim, what I bring down in the name of the sefer timim deim, which I believe is from the Ravid. I believe the sefer timim deim is from the Ravid. So let's take a look at the sharat tzion ois katan ches over here. Very interesting sharat tzion. First, he brings down over here. This sharat tzion is going back on the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Dalet, where it says that the Ramah meant to say that it's impossible that you're going to find moisture in an esrog from last year, and therefore lo yetzei tayelas ayidei bedikasei. There's no purpose in doing a bedika. Ois Katan Ches in the sharat tzion, the Chavetz Chaim brings this down from the Bach and the Eliyah Rabbah, the Chemin Moshe, the loy kataz v'chein mashma mibir agra. However, says the sharat tzion, later on, I found in the Sefer Bikura Yaakov, Shemevi b'shem Sefer Timim Deim, who brings down from the Sefer Timim Deim, Shemuchach, where it's very clear, Tisvirale Kedas HaTaz, that the Timim Deim held like the Taz, Shala'acha she'evi sham shir hayaveshus tehevi ha'ma'aril, B'shmoi Kosav, he writes, Ha de shiaru chachamim bechartzanim v'zogim shel avodah zara shenikru lachim kol shteim asar chodesh. We see that by the parts of grapes, the skins and seeds of grapes that came from avodah zara, how long do we consider them lach? We consider them to be lach for 12 months. V'siyam sham v'zel shoynai alma. Anything that you just leave without doing anything to preserve its moisture, if you take a fruit or you take the skins and seeds of grapes and you just leave them alone and you don't do anything to try and preserve their moisture, they will completely dry out within 12 months. Aval bevadai, but certainly, im yashgiach ha'adam aleim, if a person pays attention to it, lekayim oisan balachusam, to preserve their moisture, kigain, for example, shetaimnem oisan b'dvarim lachim, if you submerge it into something wet, nucha lahamin oisan kamazmanim, you could keep it moist for a long time. Va'alzeh loy nostu chachamim zman, and the chachamim never gave a zman to that. El hakol lefi mashahu. It depends what you do. Ad kan l'shaynai. Harei beferish. We see very clearly in the Sefer Timim Deim. Dizman lechud einay paisel. We can't paisel an esrog by declaring that after 12 months it's certainly going to be yavesh. It depends what you did. Dizman lechud einay paisel. The passage of 12 months alone is not enough to paisel it. Imein shir yavesh shamachat. If it doesn't have the shear of dryness given by the mechaber, that if you pass a needle through it, it's not dry. Raksha mistama im lo yashgiach lahamid lechusa lo yimtzalechus ayidei bedika. All you could say is that if 12 months have passed and you didn't do anything to try to preserve the esrog, then yes, then you could say minastam after 12 months it's going to be yavish. But if you did something to preserve it, there's no saying for sure that it's going to be yavish after 12 months. Ube'enai ro'isi, the Timim Deim says, I saw with my own eyes, esrog shekfar avar alav yoser mishana tamima me'es shenitlash b'nei ilan. I saw with my own eyes an esrog where more than a year passed from the time it was picked from the tree. Shenishmar mishlitas avir, it was protected from the air. Al yedei hesker b'kli shal matchus, by being sealed in a metal keli. V'hayamunach b'makom kar, and it was kept at a cold place. V'lach ktsas, and in a moist place. And it stayed beautiful and moist. Ubadakti, and I checked it. I guess he means with the thread. Umatsasi by leichus harbe, and I found that it was plenty moist. And therefore, I would be matir an esrog from the previous year by doing the bedika of a thread, unless it's shriveled and it's not hadar anymore. Ad kan lashon abukura Yaakov, ve'efshir dekam agroma yidaba ifetzev, u'mayi rak b'stama. So basically, we have a Ramah here who says that after a year, there's no point even in doing a bedika. It's certainly going to be yavesh. It's certainly not going to have leichus. But we have the Trim Deim over here who says if you do something to preserve it, then we're not going to say that just because 12 months passed, it's certainly not lach. Especially nowadays, we have so many different methods of preserving something. I have in my house a vacuum sealer. You can take the esrog, vacuum seal it in a bag, and take a look what it looks like next year. The Rishivas Atzal, the Igris, talks about an esrog that was put in the freezer. He says an esrog that was put in the freezer might be problematic, because even if you take it out of the freezer after a year, it looks beautiful and yellow and everything else, very often it will shrivel up and dry out extremely quickly once you take it out of the freezer. But there are so many other methods of preserving nowadays that it's very fair to say that simply because 12 months passed, the esrog is not going to be kosher. Okay, we're going to stop over here and we'll pick up Yos Hashem tomorrow with Sif Beis. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. It's of Limud HaTorah should be banging against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh should say Yeshua Severus Parnasa to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the Bias Kal Tzedek B'meher V'Yabeinu. Amen. Be well.